If you're a writer or content creator and you have the best strategy for promoting your content in the world, but you struggle to find your voice and communicate your message effectively, then you are going to struggle to break through the noise if you can do it at all. So how do you find your voice? Most people are not going to have a unique voice the second they sit down behind a computer and start typing, or sit down behind a camera and start talking. You have to develop it over time, and there's actually some things that you can do to do that. There are at least 3 things that it takes in order to develop your own unique voice. And those 3 things are connect dots, collect dots, and communicate the connection. Recently, I was with a friend and they asked me what they could do to get better at writing. And in that moment, my instinctual answer was read a lot. And I know that might sound kind of counterintuitive because reading is obviously not writing, but when you read a lot, there are at least 2 things that happen. The first is that you actually learn what good writing is like. When you pay attention not just to the content of the book that you're reading, but the actual form of the writing in the book, you pay attention to sentence structure and paragraphs and words that are used and the way that the author has written their prose in order to actually captivate your attention and communicate their message in a way that you can understand. And so you learn these different things that you can incorporate into your writing in order to make your writing better. And so that's one of the first things that you get when you just read a lot is how do you write well? How do you incorporate these things that other great authors do into your writing? But the other thing is simply the collection of information dots. By reading a lot and reading widely, you start to collect these little information dots. And these little pieces of information may not seem like much in the moment. That's all they are, just one little fact or statistic or story or anecdote or something, whatever. It could be anything. They're not much by themselves, but they are the raw material of creating content. They're the raw material that you need to write. Good output is the result of an immense amount of input. So you need to be reading books, listening to podcasts, watching YouTube videos. And frankly, the older the book that you read, the better, because it's not caught up in a lot of our modern things. You're drawing from older or even ancient wisdom and trying to pull it in and apply it to a modern day situation. Taking in information for a writer and content creator is sort of like what hunting and gathering is for a caveman. You're getting the raw materials that you need to make something to sustain your life, or in this case, sustain your work. For me, something I'm always on the lookout for are frameworks. Frameworks are anything that can provide a structure that something else can be built on. They kind of provide the foundation and supporting structure for ideas. So that could be a definition, a 3-point process, a summary, a diagram, anything that you can look through in order to see something from a different perspective. So John Mark Comer has a framework for spiritual formation. John Frame has a framework for the 3 things that the Bible is about. For him, he says that it is the creator-creature distinction, the redemptive historical meta-narrative, and a spirit-filled life. Well, if those are the 3 things the Bible is about, then you can actually overlay that on top of a myriad of different topics and you get insights from that, which we're going to talk more about here in just a second. To be practical, it's a good idea to keep a running notebook in Apple Notes or your favorite note-taking app where you just collect these information dots, these frameworks or facts or definitions or quotes or anything like that in order to have something to go back and draw on when you are ready to sit down and write, or when you have an idea. And so you're not having to remember it all in the moment and memorize it, but you just have it stored in a database somewhere. But that brings us to the second point. Not only do you want to collect dots, you want to connect dots. If all you ever did was collect dots, you would have an impressive dot collection. The only problem is a dot collection is about as useful as a brick collection. Bricks are only useful when you put them together in order to build something, and information dots are the exact same way. When 2 information dots connect, that connection is an insight. When 2 seemingly unrelated things come together, they produce a third thing that otherwise would not have been there. And it's that third thing, that insight, that is what you're after. This is the step that includes critical thinking. You're thinking through all of the implications if you connect these dots. What does it mean? Where does it go wrong? What doors does it unlock and what doors does it lock? What benefit does this provide? Who does this serve? Whenever I'm at this step, I usually like to just text a trusted friend and walk through it and think through these concepts. There's inevitably going to be a wrinkle somewhere or something that doesn't work, and I'm sending the rough draft. These are my rough thoughts. A lot of times I'll end my text with, I don't know, it needs work, but maybe it's something. I'll sit on it for weeks or months and just mull it over in my mind, trying to work through what happens when these dots connect with each other. And then also just testing feedback in different environments, whether that's conversations or texts or Twitter or a newsletter or anything like that. Just testing out ideas and seeing the feedback that I get, and is there something there? So for instance, I've been thinking through a framework for discipleship. So I texted it to a friend who has a lot of the same frame of references that I do, and we talked through it. And he pushed back in some certain places where I wasn't as clear, and it helped me think through it and talk more through the concepts. And it helped me explain it in more detail and refine my thinking. But by the end of the conversation, he texted me saying he was sitting at his desk at work crying, thinking about how that framework applied in his own life and faith. To me, I took that as a proof of concept, the first proof of concept that maybe there's something here. So I put it on Twitter. And it wasn't long after that a Christian counselor reached out to me and told me that most of the framework that I had been thinking about was the foundation for their counseling practice with Christians and churches. So some of what I was thinking about is getting employed in professional settings to already help people. So that's a second proof of concept. That doesn't mean that it's airtight and ready to go, but it does mean that there's something there and it's worth continuing to think about. So try to connect those dots of information and test it out with people that you know and trust. That's the power of an insight. Finally, after you have collected dots and you have connected dots, what you want to do is communicate the connection. With some exceptions, most people just aren't interested in raw information. What they're looking for is an insight, and that connection is the insight that they're looking for. And so that insight, that connection, is what you want to communicate to them. You don't have to highlight your information dots. You don't have to show how you made the connection. Just communicate the connection. That's what they're looking for, and that's where the value is. When you do this, you want to keep your audience in mind. The goal of this is not simply mere self-expression, but it's to serve an audience. You don't want people just to think you're insightful. You want to provide value that actually helps somebody. Maybe you're trying to help a particular problem, or articulate a shared experience, or move the needle on a particular topic. You want to keep your audience in mind and try to serve them, not just yourself. That means it's important to have a solid grasp on who you expect to read this and what their needs are. But the other thing to keep in mind is that you do want to write this in your voice. You want to inject your personality into it. So experiment with format and sentence structure and paragraphs and words and different ways of writing and images and stories in order to make it sound like you. One simple test to do this is what I call the conversation over coffee test. If you were just talking with a friend over a cup of coffee about this, what would it sound like? I doubt you'd be using a lot of really fancy words in order to impress them. If you were just talking to someone over a cup of coffee, it would probably sound a lot like you. So write that way. And when you write that way, consider that your first draft. And in your second draft, when you go back and edit, do the second test. Is it clear? When you combine the conversation over coffee test and the is it clear test, that's when you actually start to find a voice. You want it to be clear, because if it sounds like you, but nobody can follow your train of thought or have any idea what you're trying to say by the end of the piece, then you really didn't provide value or help anybody. But if you did do those things and it sounded like a robot, people might not have read it or found it compelling at all because it sounded like it was written by ChatGPT or something. But when you combine them, you make your first pass like you're talking to someone over a cup of coffee and make it sound like you. And then you go back through and you try to make it as clear as possible. Now you have something that is actually valuable to people. It sounds like you, and you can cut through the noise, and it's clear enough that people understand you and can follow what you're trying to say. It provides value in your voice. And one more note on this, just because you do it once does not mean that you found your voice. It really feels awkward the first few times that you put yourself out there. You need reps. So do this over and over and over again until eventually it starts to feel more natural. It might feel weird at first, but over time, as you do it more and more, you'll start to feel your natural voice emerging, and it'll come more naturally when you're writing. You may not have realized in all of this, but not only did I just tell you how to find your voice, I actually just made an argument for why you should find your voice. Because you will collect dots of information that other people will not collect. You will connect dots that other people could never connect. And you know of audiences to communicate to that other people have no idea about. So we need your voice. We need you to write the article, submit the book proposal, make the video, start the podcast, and share your insights with the world, because you have things that nobody else will ever have. And if you can follow these 3 steps by collecting dots, connecting dots, and communicating that connection to the people who need to hear it, then you can change their lives. And why would you hold that back from them? So now that I've given you a framework for how to find your voice, what are you going to do about it?